Welcome to Canton.Confidential, the Karen Read murder trial. It is Thursday, April 10th, day 8 of jury selection in this high-profile retrial. Good evening, everyone. I'm J.C. Monahan.
And I'm Glenn Jones. Once again, we're on the latest developments in this murder case. First off, we're still in the process of seating a jury. 16 jurors have now been seated, which was the original goal, but not so fast. There's been yet another twist in this case.
We are taking a deeper dive into Read's plan to use a third-party culprit defense strategy. The judge has allowed her to point the finger at two men, Brian Higgins and Brian Albert, who you see there. Tonight, we focus on Albert, the man who owned 34 Fairview Road at the time of John O'Keefe's death. We want to begin tonight, though, with jury selection. The process is done for the week.
Which means the search for jurors spills into next week. The magic number is no longer 16. As NBC 10's John Maroney explains, the court is now looking to get two more.
They are shooting for 18. Yeah, I've known that. But that's fine. That's fine. I trust in the jury pool.
The jury in Karen Read's murder trial still isn't set, with the court looking for two more jurors. The 45-year-old defendant has pleaded not guilty to hitting her boyfriend John O'Keefe with her SUV and leaving him to die in the snow. Her first trial ended in a hung jury.
I would be more cautious when in impaneling this jury because of the problems I think we're going to find, because of the extensive media. I would be more comfortable with 18, maybe 19, even as many as 20.
All the jurors who are selected will listen to the testimony, but only 12 will be chosen to deliberate at the end of the trial. The rest will serve as alternates, replacing the regular jurors if any problems pop up.
They're just naturally, in a long trial, you always lose some to medical emergencies or employment issues.
Has anyone seen, heard, or talked about this case? If so, please raise your hand.
Judge Beverly Cannoni polled 41 potential jurors in Thursday's pool. 88% said they've heard of the case, 61% say they formed an opinion, and 29% say they have a bias either for or against Karen Read.
The defendant starts this trial presumed to be innocent. The fact that she was arrested or that she was indicted is not proof of anything.
The 16 jurors that have been selected are 8 men and 8 women. No court tomorrow. Jury selection will resume Monday. In Dedham, John Maroney, NBC 10 Boss.
We're joined now by our courtroom insider, Sue O'Connell. So, Sue, of course, the goalpost has moved a little bit. We thought it was 16, now it's 18, which is frustrating, but maybe not crazy. Because if I think back to the last trial, by the time we got to deliberations for the jury, I think they were at 17, or at least something close to that. But in the end, we needed almost everybody.
Yeah, and people fall out, which is the part that you think, okay, you're set, you're going to be seated, you're going to be in the jury, and then for personal reasons, whatever those may or may not be, they're not able to serve. And so I totally support, especially in this case, the idea to get as many jurors seated as possible before the trial starts. Last time they seated 19, we started with 17. So in between the last day of jury selection and the first day of trial, 2 jurors dropped out. And what will happen, I imagine, is that when we go into jury selection on Monday, even if they pick enough to get to that number early in the morning, they're going to keep going and just pick as many as they possibly can.
Which makes sense. We're in the retrial.
Yes.
Let's try to, go through the whole thing. In the first trial, it took 5 days to seat a jury. We thought this would take longer. When Karen Read exited yesterday, she seemed like, yep, we're just about there. We just need that one more. Now that, as you just mentioned, we're stretching into Monday and we're starting to up the numbers, did you sense any sort of frustration, like we're not done yet?
Yeah, not really, not even in the courtroom. I think I mentioned before, it's a little bit more somber this time than it was last time. But as this day was wrapping up, there was no feeling of like, oh my gosh, we're going to have to come back on Monday to do it from, either side. Obviously, the prosecution is very tight-lipped and not at all interacting. But yeah, I think that the idea is to get the jurors, get them set, because the worst thing you want, is to not have enough to start the trial or to get through the trial and then have people drop out. So, this is a really, dot your I's, cross your T's moment.
Feels that way.
Sue O'Connell, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so Karen Read's defense team has set the stage to implicate someone else in John O'Keefe's death. 2 men have been identified in a third-party culprit defense.
ATF agent Brian Higgins, who we discussed last night, and retired police detective Brian Albert. On the stormy morning, first responders rushed to John O'Keefe in the snow near death outside 34 Fairview Road.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Homeowner Brian Albert testified he was in his bedroom just a few yards away.
I was sleeping in my room.
In a third-party culprit defense, Reed's lawyers are expected to point the finger at retired Boston police detective Brian Albert. They allege John O'Keefe, a Boston cop still on the force, went into Albert's house that night, and it's the reason he's dead.
John O'Keefe was never in my house before or after that date.
On a night of drinking in January 2022, 34 Fairview was the after-party spot. O'Keefe and his girlfriend Karen Reed were invited. Prosecutors say Reed backed her SUV into John right after she dropped him off here. The defense claims a brotherhood of cops are trying to frame her.
And you admitted, in your own words, that the cop homeowner wasn't going to, quote, catch any right?
Correct.
Trooper Michael Proctor led the state police investigation. The defense says text messages he sent to friends are evidence of a conspiracy. Proctor, now fired for his messages about Karen Reed, says otherwise.
The homeowner wasn't going to catch any because Mr. Albert had nothing to do with Mr. O'Keefe's death.
The defense says Proctor did not question Albert right after the incident in front of his house. No formal interview until 6 months later. They also raised suspicion about the Albert family dog, Chloe. She was in the same bedroom that night and, like the Alberts, wasn't stirred by the commotion outside, according to testimony.
So Chloe was rehomed in, I believe, May.
Of 2022.
Of 2022.
Just months after the incident that we're discussing.
Well, after it was involved, she was involved in a dog fight with another dog out front.
The defense has suggested injuries on O'Keefe's arm could have come from Chloe, and the Albert family, owners of the property since the 70s, sold it just months after O'Keefe's death.
Is that timing a coincidence?
Well, that's not the timing, actually. We contacted the realtor in 2021, finally listed it in 2022.
Many people visited 34 Fairview that night, including ATF Special Agent Brian Higgins. He's a friend of the Alberts, and the second of two people the defense argues could be culpable as third parties in the death of John O'Keefe. Phone records show the two Bryans connected on a call on the night in question, but both men deny they spoke by phone that night. Both of them also got new phones. It's important to note only Karen Reed has been charged in the death of John O'Keefe.
Okay, let's bring in Attorney Morgia Durasier to talk more about this third-party culprit defense. We had Michael Coyne on last night. We got his opinion, so I want to ask you because, once again, it's putting burden on the defense team to put some evidence in there to support this idea that it could be Brian Albert, it could be Brian Higgins. Usually, all the burden's on the prosecution to prove. Do you think a smart way to go about it, or should they simply just stick to the narrative of she didn't do it?
So I think what we're trying to do here is create more reasonable doubt. So the defense team, they're coming into this knowing that they have a new prosecution, a new timeline, a new flow for the case. So if this is your final time around, you're going to pull out all the stops. Pointing the finger at somebody else, all it does is just enlarge that reasonable doubt that they're trying to hinder at. I don't think they're going to have enough to pull through with the third-party culprit theory, but I think it's a good strategy for them going into the second trial.
All right, so we don't know exactly when opening statements will begin, but we know who will be involved in them. The first time around, it's going to look a little bit different, and we want to remind you of what it looked like last year.
Karen Reed was framed. Her car never struck John O'Keefe. She did not cause his death. And that means that somebody else did.
The defendant, Karen Reed, is guilty of murder in the second degree, striking the victim, Mr. O'Keefe, with her car, knocking him back onto the ground, striking his head on the ground, causing the bleeding in his brain, swelling, and then leaving him there.
So that was defense attorney David Yannetti and assistant DA Adam Lally delivering opening statements last time. But this time around, it won't be either of them doing that. For the defense, it will be Alan Jackson, we're told. And for the prosecution, it will be Special Prosecutor Hank Brennan. What do you think about this changeup? Any ideas of what might fuel it?
So again, this is the second time around. You want to do the best that you possibly can. And I think having Alan Jackson, who was a former prosecutor, don't forget, he's coming in with a different perspective of presentation, and he's going to get to go second, right? Prosecution goes first, he goes second. So he's going to take in all those cues from the new special prosecutor, and I'm assuming weave them into what his opening statement is. I think it's a great idea.
So I'm just going to play the Boston card for just 1 minute because David Yannetti is our local guy. And then you have Alan Jackson, who can look L.A.
Yes,
is that a good way to put
sometimes.
it? Yeah, it just has just a little bit of that. Does that, I mean, you're a lawyer. Does that play at all? Or at this point, no one cares?
So remember, the opening statement is about telling a story, right? How are you going to get the story across? How are you going to resonate it to these jurors who, a lot of them have already heard this case and they know all the facts and they know how it's going to play out. So maybe this is a different presentation that's going to come from maybe an LA point of view, but I think it's a good strategy because they know who did all the questioning and the opening and all that the first time around. So it's a fresh start on both sides, and I think it's also a great idea.
Based on where we are now, do you still feel good about a Tuesday for opening statements, or now does that seem too soon?
So we have 16 jurors, right? The likelihood we're going to get 2 more on Monday, it's really high. I mean, it's a good feeling that we can start on Tuesday, which is really exciting to get this going because I know a lot of people have been waiting, including the O'Keefe family and Miss Reed and her team. So Tuesday seems highly likely.
Okay, good, because we'll be ready.
Yes, absolutely.
Morgietta, thanks very much.
As always.
Karen Reed's retrial is expected to last 6 to 8 weeks. We'll hear from dozens of witnesses during that time.
Okay, so as we prepare for testimony to begin, we thought it was a good time now to get caught up on who's who in this high-profile case. At least that is one of what our viewers asked. This is Greg suggesting that by email that it would be beneficial to feature a diagram of all the witnesses and then their connection to one another, because there is quite a web here. Look at the first trial. Just like then, we've put together an interactive chart to help you ahead of the retrial. This tool shows who some of the key players are, how they're related to one another. It includes members of the Albert family, the McCabe family, as well as now former State Trooper Michael Proctor, along with, Karen Reed herself. So there you can play around, sort of update yourself so you get familiar with the names before we begin the actual trial.
It is an invaluable tool. I use it myself. If you have any questions about this case, send them our way. We've got the email up on your screen right now. Morgietta, Michael Coyne, all of them are here to answer your questions. You can email us at Canton.Confidential at NBCUni.com. And remember, NBC 10 Boston is your source for everything related to the Karen Reed retrial. Be sure to join us weeknights at 7 for a full recap of the day's court proceedings.